Next question. I have heard that the 9/11 Truth Movement has definitive proof that 9/11 was an inside job. Is this true? As I alluded in my previous answer to the previous question, there is in fact definitive evidence that 9/11 was an inside job. And it is this simple. The laws of physics, Newtonian physics we're not even talking quantum physics, which is more esoteric. We're talking basic Newtonian physics, high school level physics. Newtonian physics, the laws of chemistry, the laws of thermodynamics, the laws of mechanical engineering, all of what we know as science leads to the conclusion that the Twin Towers and Building 7 were all three brought down in controlled demolitions on 9/11. And as I said just a minute ago, this isn't a theory. It's actually been proven, as much as you can prove anything. And the way it's been proven is using basic laws of physics. Now, the first thing that was done is the official conspiracy theory that airplanes caused the buildings to collapse. That was shown to be utterly impossible, again, due to the laws of physics. Conservation of linear and angular momentum. A body at inertia, a body at rest tends to stay at rest. A body at motion tends to stay in motion. The fact that there was a free fall collapse of the towers. And this is evidence we'll get into more detail on, but this is the evidence that would lead me to say definitively, yes, there is scientific, unrefutable evidence that 9/11 was an inside job by virtue of the fact that the towers and Building 7 were brought down in controlled demolitions. So the answer is yes, we have definitive proof, and we'll get in more of the physical evidence and the specifics about the controlled demolition in our next section, part 2. Next question. Now the questions are getting even tougher. What motive could the government possibly have had for doing something so terrible? Who in the government do you think was involved? Now, this is where things really start getting difficult. The answer to that question is that when the questioner said the government, I think they meant the government of the United States of America. Now, clearly, the government of the United States of America, not the entire government, virtually the entire government is involved in covering up the crimes of 9/11, as I mentioned, other than Cynthia McKinney, as I called out, who is no longer part of the government. But yes, virtually the entire government of the United States of America, Democrats and Republicans, are guilty of covering up the crimes of 9/11. But only a small part of the government was involved in the planning and perpetration of those crimes. And that small segment involved elements of the CIA, including all the way up to George Tenet, elements of the FBI, elements of the military, including General Myers, who was in charge of the military that day, who was in charge of the safety of this country. General Myers, who had since been promoted to Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he clearly was involved in it. Bush and Cheney were clearly involved in it. Wolfowitz and Pearl were clearly involved in it. Rumsfeld was clearly involved in it. Dov Zakhaev, the comptroller of the Pentagon, was clearly involved in it. There were many people within the government of the United States, also in the business world, which I won't get into too many people from the commercial world, from the world of business, but there were also people in the business world who were involved in it. For instance, Marvin Bush, who was the head of Securicom, who happens to be the youngest brother of George Bush. And Securicom, his company, had security at the World Trade Center from 96 to 98. And the demolition of the World Trade Center was planned well before 2001. I personally believe that some of the charges were planted while Securicom had the security contract. Kroll's took over the security contract from Securicom. They are a CIA-affiliated company. So there was plenty of involvement of insider companies and the government. There was also involvement, there's ample evidence of involvement of other governments. For instance, we know that there were many Mossad agents, effectively that's Israeli CIA, and Israeli spies that were in this country who, prior to 9/11, who were released back to Israel, no questions asked, thanks to Michael Chertoff, who's the head of Homeland Security, and Michael Mukasey, who's the new Attorney General. Those two individuals were instrumental in releasing these Israeli spies back to Israel with no questions asked, and that included Mossad agents. So there's ample evidence indicating that elements of Mossad was involved in this, and some people even say elements of MI6, which is British Foreign Secret Service. That one, not as much evidence, but personally I've seen some fingers pointed that direction as well. So yes, indeed, the people that did this were elements of the United States government, elements of the Israeli government, particularly Mossad, the Secret Service, and also possibly elements of the British government. But this is very controversial. Some people deny any involvement other than the U.S. government, but I think there's ample evidence if you look into it yourself. Let me just mention that the Arab involvement, the Arabs, the hijackers, they were patsies. They were patsies. They were set up. They were not the planners and perpetrators of this. Neither was Osama bin Laden. And the other part of that question, what was the motive? Well, now that's the most interesting part of this. When you start doing research on things like 9/11, 9/11 was a false flag operation. It was psychological warfare. When you start doing research on, well, is that a new phenomenon, or is there historical precedence? You look at that Hitler had the Reichstag in Germany burned, and then he blamed it on the communists, and he used that as an excuse to seize dictatorial control of Germany, and to the first activity of the Nazis was to get rid of the communists, to lock up the communists. The Jews only came much later. And so the burning of their own Reichstag, their parliament. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was something that was concocted by Lyndon Johnson and McNamara. And it never happened. They just made it up. So the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which was the excuse to get this country in the Vietnam War by saying that Vietnamese attacked peaceful U.S. warships in the Gulf of Tonkin, was purely made up. And then you look at even Pearl Harbor, probably the most famous of all these incidences. Pearl Harbor was another false flag. Yes, the Japanese did attack Pearl Harbor, but FDR goaded them into it by, he had a 10-point plan which included an oil embargo, so they were trying to bring Japan to its knees so Japan would be forced to strike out and give them an excuse for the United States of America to enter World War II. That's what the whole reason of the Pearl Harbor bombing was. So they goaded the Japanese into the attack. They knew the attack was coming because they had dirigibles up. They saw the Pacific Fleet coming over. And then they sent out on war games all of the functioning, the seaworthy Pacific Fleet sent out on war games, and all that was left at Pearl Harbor were the scuttled ships. That's why the casualties at Pearl Harbor were so low. I think something like only 2,400 people perhaps, which is of course a lot, but a lot less than it could have been had most of the Pacific Fleet not been out on maneuvers that day. So even Pearl Harbor, and the neocons had said in their document for U.S. global hegemony, and they mused that what they needed, what this country needed, what they needed was a new Pearl Harbor to rally the people behind a new great cause of U.S. global dominance. And that's exactly what 9/11 was, my friends, and that's the title of a book by David Ray Griffin, The New Pearl Harbor, which he draws the parallel between that wasn't exactly a false flag, but it was a psychological warfare. 9/11 was a false flag, which is an operation that is done under the flag of one country, but done by another country. So they did it under the flag of Islam, but the real flag behind it was, as I said earlier, United States, Israel, and very likely UK. So the motive was to create an excuse to go to war, to seize the oil assets of the Middle East, to clamp down and impose a fascistic-style police state on the United States and in Britain. And that included passing things like the Patriot Act It included going to war against Iraq. It had nothing to do with 9/11. Well, neither did Osama bin Laden. And it included passing laws that's taken away our habeas corpus. You know, rights we've had for 800 years since the Magna Carta, we no longer have, thanks to 9/11. So the motive was to take away our constitutional liberties, to create fear. And Bush's approval rating went from 10% or something, maybe low 20s, I think it was only in the teens maybe, before 9/11 to 90%. So he went from the most unpopular president to the most popular president. So it achieved its goals, but it's all based on a lie.